This is a soldier with a machine gun in 1942, and this is one in 2025. Notice anything familiar about what they're holding? Have you ever wondered why the infamous MG42 still echoes across modern battlefields? Why, despite decades of innovation, it simply refuses to die? If so, you're about to uncover the truth, the real story behind the most dissected and misunderstood weapon ever featured on so-called history channels. Let's begin. The MG42's origins trace all the way back to the MG08, so that's where our story starts. At first glance, the MG08 and MG42 seem worlds apart. The MG08 was a water-cooled descendant of the Maxim gun, the weapon that forever changed warfare in World War I by introducing sustained, high-rate automatic fire. But times were changing. The Germans understood that the next war wouldn't be fought from muddy trenches. They were developing the soon-to-be-feared Blitzkrieg, lightning war, and they needed a weapon that could match its speed, delivering relentless fire in step with fast-moving troops. The old 80-pound MG08, grinding out 500 rounds per minute, simply didn't fit that vision. Still, it remained in use throughout the Second World War, mostly guarding defensive positions or holding secondary lines. In the years leading up to the conflict, Germany worked feverishly and in secrecy on a new generation of machine guns. Bound by the post-World War I treaties that forbade weapon development, their engineers had to move in the shadows. Their first success emerged as the MG13, a lighter, air-cooled weapon that a single soldier could carry into battle. And with the first quick-change barrel system came a string of radical departures. No water jacket, no cumbersome tripod. Instead, a light bipod at the muzzle. For its moment, these were revolutionary innovations, and they would shape the MG42 to come. Yet the decisive difference, the reason the MG13 was soon set aside, lay in its feed. The MG13 used a 25-round magazine rather than belt feed, at roughly 600 rounds per minute, that gave a gunner barely 2.5 seconds of fire before a reload. Sustained suppressive fire was impossible. 4 years passed before a genuine breakthrough arrived, the MG34. It was the world's first true general-purpose machine gun, belt-fed, fitted with a quick barrel change, and built from high-quality milled parts. Its cyclic rate climbed to about 900 rounds per minute, roughly a 50% jump over earlier designs. For a time, the MG34 stood unmatched. Its versatility was remarkable. It served on tanks and vehicles, adapted into spider-like anti-aircraft mounts, bolted to aircraft for strafing runs, and in infantry hands, it fought from bipod, shoulder, or tripod. One of its most ingenious features, shared later with the MG42, was the Lafette mount, a precision firing platform that allowed sustained, accurate fire, and will be worth examining in more detail. Still, greatness carried limits. The MG34 was sensitive to dust, mud, and cold. Crews learned to clean and oil it religiously. More pressingly, it was a luxury of manufacture, a complex, labor-intensive weapon requiring skilled hands and substantial time and cost to produce. When war demanded hundreds of thousands of guns across many fronts, German engineers began seeking stamped steel solutions, cheaper, faster to make, but never to sacrifice battlefield performance. Imagine you are an engineer given an impossible brief. Outperform the finest machine gun in the world, and have both its cost and production time. That is precisely the task German designers accepted. The MG42 was their answer. Forged from stamped steel as demanded, it offered a 30% increase in cyclic rate, a faster quick-change barrel system, far greater tolerance for the grime of real battlefields, and, crucially, required roughly half the labor to produce one unit compared to its predecessor. It was an astonishing feat of applied ingenuity. Once the design settled, the MG42 moved rapidly into mass production. Over the course of the war, some 400,000 examples would roll from German factories. Yet the MG42 never entirely supplanted its predecessor. for practical, logistical reasons more than purely technical ones. Retooling plants already churning out MG34s would have disrupted urgently needed supply. And the MG34 still fulfilled roles the MG42 could not easily assume. The difference lay in their barrel change systems. To replace a hot barrel on the MG34, you unlatched and swung back the barrel housing, withdrew the spent tube from behind, slid in a fresh one, and relocked the assembly. The MG42 simplified the operation. Unlatch from the side, extract the barrel with a single motion, push in the fresh barrel, and slam it locked. Efficient, speedy, but impractical inside the tight confines of a tank turret without extensive redesign. Thus, when an MG42 appeared on armor, it was typically mounted externally, above the commander's cupola for additional anti-infantry or anti-aircraft coverage, while coaxial and hull rolls remained the preserve of the MG34. Germany therefore maintained parallel production lines for both guns and continued to supply spare parts for thousands of MG34s already in service. Then there are the legends. The MG42 fired at such a blistering pace, in some configurations more than double the rounds per minute of contemporary Allied weapons, that Allied soldiers often perceived its report as one continuous scream, a noise so unnerving it earned nicknames like the buzzsaw. Rumors grew, dark and half-true, that its rate of fire could somehow cleave a man. There is a kernel of truth in the terror, but it is the engineering that made the fear real. Clever tolerancing, stamped steel economy, simplified mechanisms, and a relentless focus on reliability under duress. Do not mistake the din for mere hype. The MG42's lasting place in military history rests on practical, hard-won solutions to the brutal arithmetic of total war: speed of production, battlefield reliability, and destructive power. It is why, with only modest modification, descendants of this design would still see service long after the conflict that birthed it, and decades beyond. Now, imagine its impact in 1942, when no weapon on Earth could rival it. The moment the MG42 roared across the battlefield, Allied troops took notice and learned to fear it, and for good reason. The MG42 fired from an open bolt, improving cooling and preventing rounds from cooking off in the chamber during sustained fire. Its short recoil operation used a roller locking bolt, a brilliant mechanical dance where the barrel and bolt recoiled together after each shot. After moving back a few millimeters, the rollers halted the barrel while the bolt continued rearward, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a new round, and firing again the instant it locked. This cycle repeated at blinding speed for as long as the trigger was held. It chambered the powerful 8x57mm Mauser cartridge, the same round used in the Kar 98K rifle, though machine guns often fired slightly enhanced loads, with tracer rounds placed every fifth shot. These helped gunners track their bursts and walk their fire onto the target. The ammunition belts were non-disintegrating, composed of linked steel sections of 50 rounds each, often joined into 250-round lengths for use in boxes or even longer in fixed or armored mounts. To make the weapon more mobile, German gunners could attach compact drums holding a 50-round belt, keeping ammunition clean, tangle-free, and always ready, unlike the exposed belts Allied troops often struggled with. Even the smallest details reflected German precision. Their ammunition cans had folding handles with leather grips for comfort and clever positioning that allowed two to be carried in one hand or stacked neatly inside cramped vehicles and bunkers. They were watertight, easy to latch onto belts or tripods, and designed for efficiency down to the last rivet. No Allied army possessed anything remotely this refined. Every component, from the rounds to the mounts, worked together in perfect mechanical harmony. And the crown jewel of this entire system was the Lafette tripod. Before we move on to what became of the MG42 after the war, we must take a closer look at this masterpiece of engineering. Because neither the machine gun nor its mount story ended with the war that produced them. This is the Lafette 42, a specialized mount weighing roughly 45 pounds. The Allies had heavy tripods of their own, but none quite like this. It was clever engineering, transforming a light machine gun into something that behaved like a heavy weapon. The Lafette used tubular steel legs to support a central cradle for the gun. Two coiled buffer springs absorbed recoil, damping vibrations so the weapon remained stable and accurate, and a separate trigger relieved the gunner from wrestling with the recoil impulse. It featured fine, precision-aiming controls and optical sights that extended effective range to around 3,000 meters, enough to permit indirect fire, in effect turning the gun into a form of light artillery. What made it truly brilliant was an integrated mechanical computer, the Tion FOIA automatic. Functioning like a clockwork mechanism, it allowed the gunner to set two range limits and define a sweep zone. In short, the crew selected the field they wanted covered, a road the enemy might use, a bridge to deny, a choke point to block. Once set, the mechanism would sweep the gun automatically through that sector. When the trigger was pulled, the Lafette would fire and mechanically traverse across the preset sector. The gunner need not even remain beside the weapon. With the trigger engaged, the gun would continue its programmed sweep, and a string tied to the trigger allowed a man to shelter while the gun raked the chosen field for as long as ammunition lasted. The Lafette worked with both the MG34 and the MG42, and remains one of the most underappreciated elements of German small arms design. It multiplied the effectiveness of their machine guns, turning them into something like automatic snipers. Barrel changes were simpler in the Mount too. A well-drilled crew could replace a hot barrel in 3 to 4 seconds and resume sustained fire from a prepared defensive position. MG42s mounted on the Lafette were a nightmare for advancing Allied troops, not only because of raw rate of fire, but because the low profile of the setup made it hard to spot and knock out. German teams were masters of deception too, preparing multiple firing positions and rotating between them. After a period of fire, they would move, shift angle, and open up from a fresh emplacement. The result was maddening for Allied units. Fire seemed to come from every direction, suggesting far greater numbers than actually present, and commanders were left uncertain where to direct artillery or armor to silence the guns. The combination of mechanical precision and tactical cunning made these emplacements far deadlier than their numbers suggested, and often forced attackers to slow and probe rather than advance. When German forces were forced to retreat, they rarely did so in chaos. More often, they withdrew only after inflicting devastating losses on advancing Allied troops, then fell back to the next prepared line to repeat the process. This grim pattern became common in the final years of the war, as the Wehrmacht was pushed relentlessly toward Berlin and made every Allied advance painfully costly in blood. One of their deadliest tactics involved deception. Two machine guns would work in concert, the first firing tracer rounds high above Allied lines, luring frontline soldiers into thinking the fire was aimed further back. When they rose to move forward, the second gun, lying silent until that moment, would open fire and cut them down where they stood. For the German gunner himself, discipline was everything. The MG42 spat out roughly 20 rounds per second, and holding the trigger too long could be catastrophic. Prolonged bursts risked overheating the barrel or jamming the feed system, sometimes causing the weapon to explode in the operator's hands. This incredible rate of fire was both its strength and its curse, devastating in short bursts but voracious in ammunition. To harness its full potential, the Germans built their entire infantry squad around the machine gun. Unlike the Allies, who treated such weapons as support tools and divided them into light, medium, and heavy categories, the Germans focused their squad tactics on a single dominant weapon system, the MG34 or MG42. A typical squad numbered 10 men. At its core was the machine gun team, a gunner, his assistant, and an ammunition bearer. Together, they carried, maintained, and operated the weapon with near-mechanical precision, adjusting aim, swapping barrels, and reloading under fire. If the gunner was hit, his assistant instantly took over without hesitation. All three were armed with 9mm pistols for personal defense. Supporting them were 6 riflemen with Kar 98K bolt-action rifles, whose duty was to protect the gun team, advance under its covering fire, and secure objectives once the machine gun had pinned the enemy. The 10th man, usually a non-commissioned officer, served as squad leader, armed with the MP40 submachine gun to direct movement and coordinate with other units. Often, a horse or donkey hauled the ammunition cart, and they needed it. A single 250-round belt box weighed about 8 kilograms or 20 pounds and could be emptied in just 10 seconds of firing. Ammunition had to be managed with care during extended engagements, so if the MG42 was this extraordinary, fast, powerful, reliable, why didn't the Allies adopt it after capturing thousands in battle? And why didn't anyone simply copy it for their own armies? Well, they did use it, and they did copy it, though not without difficulty. Allied soldiers often turned captured MG42s against their former owners whenever possible, especially within resistance movements and partisan units. It's been said that German troops would execute anyone caught using their own weapons, though such cases were likely rare and isolated. The real problem lay elsewhere. Soldiers weren't trained to handle the MG42. They didn't know its maintenance rituals, its quirks, or how to keep it running under stress. Spare parts and ammunition were never guaranteed, unless more could be captured, and once something broke, it often stayed broken. As for copying it, the Americans tried. Under the T-24 project, engineers attempted to reverse engineer the MG42 to fire the .30-06 cartridge. 2 prototypes were built, but both failed to match the reliability or blistering rate of fire of the original. Mechanical issues plagued the design, and eventually the project was abandoned. Too time-consuming, too complex, and unnecessary when existing U.S. machine guns were easier to produce. Still, the MG42's influence didn't disappear. Its mechanical brilliance inspired later weapons, most notably the M60 machine gun, which borrowed several design elements from the MG42 and the FG42 paratrooper rifle. When Germany finally surrendered, many weapons were scrapped, but not this one. Vast stockpiles of MG42s were left behind, soon scavenged by nations across the world. Some, like Yugoslavia, built their own exact copies, the M53, which remained in service for decades. And when West Germany joined NATO and needed a new general-purpose machine gun, its engineers took a look at Allied designs and said, essentially, we already built something better. They revived their wartime masterpiece, rechambered it for the NATO 7.62 by 51mm round, and named it the MG1. It was, in essence, the same gun, the same heart, the same spirit, only adapted for a new era. It proved so efficient and reliable that few could match it. A slightly heavier bolt was introduced to slow its furious rate of fire to a more controllable 900 rounds per minute. This evolution led directly to the MG3, which added refinements like disintegrating belts and improved materials, yet remained true to the 1942 design. Decades later, the MG3 still serves with some of the most advanced armies in the world. Mounted on vehicles, tanks, and remote weapon stations, now paired with night vision and modern fire control systems, it continues to embody the same lethal precision first born in the fires of the Second World War. And no one, it seems, is in any hurry to replace it.